Grazie. And our rapporteur is Mr. Dartmouth, please.
Well, it's a great privilege to have this slot, so thank you very much. You very rarely hear a politician saying, I've come here to listen, so may I also take the opportunity of saying how much that is appreciated. I have actually, not everyone, I think actually nobody on the committee knows this, with the exception of our distinguished representative of the ECR. I've actually written a book about trade, and here it is. In the fullness of time, maybe it'll have a wider dissemination than it already has. However, I'm going to make my comments rather wider than just trade. So first of all, let me start with my own opinion. First of all, I think there should be an emphasis in supporting small and medium-sized enterprises. We now know, which wasn't clear in the 70s, we now know that small and medium-sized enterprises lead the economy. They don't follow the economy. And it's small and medium-sized enterprises that tend to provide growth and innovation. And that should be recognised in the EU budget. The second point I would make is that macro-financial assistance, I would seek some clarification as to whether the EU budget includes in its allocation the UK contribution via aid relating to the time after in which we leave. As you know, the UK has this very, very large aid budget. I prefer to use the term. Sorry, I see the. How long have I got actually? I see the clock's going. I always keep within my time. It doesn't matter. Okay. Has a very large aid budget. I would argue a swollen aid budget, and some of that swollen aid budget finds its way into the EU's macro-financial assistance. So it would be most interesting to know what your calculations are on that after March of next year. Thirdly, the opinion that I should be putting forward is that macro-financial assistance should be needs-driven and not policy-driven. It should be driven on the basis of needs, not on the basis of policy. The EU also has a trade-related assistance, which has been defined as the EU's aid for trade. But I prefer the expression trade, not aid. And that is what the EU should, in my view, actually look at. Now, in trade agreements, there's an interesting statistic. If you go through the EU's trade agreements, which is a very good way of spending some time, you'll find out of all the EU's trade agreements, the GDP of those countries, only 9 of those countries have a larger GDP than Denmark. And none of those countries has a larger GDP than the UK. Now, at such time as Japan becomes, at such time as the EU-Japan trade agreement is absolutely finalised, that will obviously change by 1 point. But it does show the difficulty which the European Union has had in entering into substantive and material trade agreements. And therefore, the argument I put forward is that human rights and labour rights, desirable as they are, trade agreements are just not the right forum for that. Otherwise, you just don't get any trade agreements at all. That's essentially been the experience of the EU. Finally, I reject the view that trade should be an instrument for creating growth and jobs, not a foreign policy tool, to achieve aims which aren't necessarily agreed. And I said I didn't entirely want to restrict my comments to trade, so I've got 3 lightning points, which I should be able to get within the 4-minute mark. First of all, that the EU is leaving and will no longer be paying in the same amount of the budget. Therefore, the EU budget should recognise that, and that the obliging and therefore the remaining member states would then have to increase their contribution, and this will likely cause several member states severe difficulties. Further, it should be pointed out that member states in the Eurozone are obliged by treaty to limit their domestic budget deficits. It follows, therefore, that that when the EU leaves, the EU should reduce the budget rather than increasing. And one simple and straightforward saving, which I think we can all agree, is that it should be one seat for the European Parliament and not two. And finally, there is one gigantic anomaly, which I think we can all agree from, except for one member of this committee, which is this. Luxembourg is far and away the richest country in the European Union, measured by annual income per capita. It's also one of the 5 or 6 richest countries in the world. Nonetheless, there are over 2,000 administrative jobs relating to the European Parliament located in Luxembourg. These could be more usefully relocated to low employment regions of the European Union, such as southern Italy or a poor country like Bulgaria. And I would really recommend that those 2,000 jobs should be relocated. It makes no sense for them to be in Luxembourg. Incidentally, I rather doubt that all of this opinion will come out exactly as I've rendered it out of this committee. But on the other hand, as you're in a listening mode, I couldn't resist the opportunity. And thank also for the colleagues for at least hearing me out on these thoughts. Thank you very much.